Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Alnwick Castle Podcast. I'm your host Daniel Watkins, and on today's episode we'll be looking at a new addition to the Alnwick Castle visitor attraction, a 3D printed model representing Alnwick Castle as it looked centuries ago. I spoke with the castle archivist Chris Hunwick, who undertook a huge amount of research into historic and archival sources to provide material that could make this model a true representation of Alnwick Castle as it was once known. Here is our conversation going into the process and the stories of the surveys and maps that have been made of the castle in the past. I hope you enjoy it. I am very pleased to be joined on this episode of the Alnwick Castle Podcast by Alnwick Castle's Archivist, Chris Hunwick. How are you?
Hello. Very pleased to be here.
And we are here to talk about the newly on display model of Alnwick Castle that visitors can see in 2022. So what is the castle model and how did it come to be created?
The castle model is a 3D printout of the castle as it would have been in 1608 specifically. This came about really by chance. We were approached by Ryan Gregory last year, who is an architectural model maker, usually for, or in the past, for architectural models for planning permissions and the like. But he had visited Alnwick Castle and been inspired to take his model making to a new level. And he approached us and asked if we might be interested in a project with him to make a model of the castle. We were trepidatious at first because this is quite a large-scale project to get something historically accurate. And whereas previously we had worked on a bird's-eye view of the castle on paper in different centuries, that gave us a way of skipping some of the awkward bits because you only ever saw it from one angle. Whereas this, you can walk around it and see the whole thing. You can see every part of the castle. So I spoke to Ryan before the project began, and we ascertained that the best date to set the model at would be 1608, because we have firm evidence in the archives for what stood here at that date.
And it's worth pointing out that the castle in the 21st century is not the same building and structure as it would have been in 1608. There's been huge restoration since then, so it makes it that little bit more challenging to take it that far back in time.
Yes, that's right. The castle evolves and has evolved constantly since it was built to the present day and will continue to. So we picked 1608 because of the strong archival evidence for that date, using Ralph Treswell's ground plans of the castle and his bird's eye view of the castle. We know that this was done in 1608 because we've traced the payment for it. Thomas Fotherly, the 9th Earl of Northumberland's Receiver General for the North, records a payment on the 16th of November 1608 of £7.10 to Mr. Treswell for making and drawing of 5 plots in vellum of Alnwick Castle, and a further 7 shillings and sixpence for vellum which he wanted for the finishing of them. Now, I believe that the vellum he wanted for the finishing was these little flaps that he's put, which show the different stories, the different levels of the towers on the walls.
Lift the flap books, not particularly popular in the 17th century. Is this quite rare for a document of that age?
I'd say it is. I've not really come across many examples like this. And also, I must say, it's fairly impractical. The size of these plots would fill this table in front of us, and the only really efficient way of storing them is to roll them, as most plans are. This gives real problems for the flaps because they go the opposite direction from the way the map rolls. So we have actually just recently had them conserved, and we've relaxed the size of the roll so it's not so tightly curled, and it's now on a much larger circumference, so the flaps are now in a much better condition.
How did these 400-year-old plans work in conjunction with modern technology like 3D printing? How do you as an archivist and a 3D model maker collaborate?
That was the interesting bit. Ryan, when we first spoke, he'd already done a bit of background work and he'd sourced LiDAR-accurate topographical maps of the castle, which are on the internet. And these are showing all the different levels of the contours of the building and the ground that it stands on. So he already had that, and he'd also sourced modern-day photography of the castle. So he had a visual source and a map source. And then when I supplied him with the 1608 plans, he could see, obviously, a lot of the structure you see today is on that footprint. So combining it with the LiDAR mapping and the visual photographs, he's been able to come up with a pretty accurate, as far as it can be, this is what we believe the castle looked like then.
It is quite a magnificent structure. The walls are all there. There are towers there that are not there today. There are towers that are at the castle today that weren't there in 1608. Did creating this model involve any new research on your part as the archivist?
Yes, it did. Of course, Tresswell's plans do not give any names or uses of the towers, so we had to combine the map evidence of 1608 with George Clarkson's survey of 1567. Clarkson was the surveyor for the 7th Earl of Northumberland, so he is surveying the Lord's lands and buildings, giving an account of the condition that they're in. And for Alnwick Castle, he gives a very detailed survey telling us the names of the different towers and the state they're in and what they're used for. So there's obviously 40 years between these two sources, but you can follow Clarkson's survey description on these plans by Tresswell. And there were several areas which don't fit when you follow Clarkson and look at Tresswell. So, for instance, the main example is in the Inner Bailey. Clarkson describes very clearly a bakehouse, a brewhouse, a slaughterhouse, accommodation for the priests, and these do not feature on Tresswell's ground plan.
What do you think the reason for that is?
Well, it could be that within that 40 years those buildings have been removed for whatever reason. We had to take a decision on this for the model, and we decided that as we're saying it's 1608, we would go with Tresswell rather than Clarkson on that element. Maybe the brewing and baking had shifted out into the town in that 40-year period, or maybe Tresswell decided not to put the functional buildings on his ground plan, though he does put the stables in the Outer Bailey and he does put the chapel in the Inner Bailey. So the verdict's open.
Yeah, and we can see that the stables buildings are there on the model with enough space for the number of horses that would have been able to fit in the castle even at that time. How have these documents survived the past 400 years? Have they always been in the castle archive, or have they been found a little bit more recently?
The Tresswell plans are in the part of the Scion collection. They're a Scion B-class item, so they have been down at Scion House for some of their history. Obviously, they would have been made up here on site. They're paid for by the receiver in the north, but then they're sent to the seat of administration, presumably in the south, either at Northumberland House in London or at Scion House near Brentford. The Clarkson survey, however, is part of the Alnwick Castle catalogue, so that was made on site and kept on site. And this leads neatly onto a question about where these items were kept on site, because this is one of the discrepancies that we've found actually between Tresswell's bird's eye view and Tresswell's ground plot.
Today, the archive is held in a tower known as the Record Tower. It was not always the case?
No, it wasn't. And this was part of the research. I found out something that surprised me and altered what I've been saying for the last few years. I used to say that Clarkson's description talks about the southeast corner tower. And he says that it is only 2 stories in height, level with the top of the wall, that it is open-backed and used as a hay store. So not the seat of the archives in 1567, very clearly. And I have found a 15th century document that talks about the Exchequer House in the Outer Bailey holding a chest, an iron-bound chest, where all the remembrances and court rolls and documents to be preserved was securely held. So I think the Exchequer House is the archives in the 15th century, certainly.
And that's on the Outer Bailey near the stables?
That's right, just next to the gatehouse. Clarkson clearly describes a hay store with no back to it. When we look at Treswell's bird's eye view, the southeast corner tower is now clearly shown as 3 stories in height, with a door and windows and a back to the tower. And I've been saying for over a decade now that there must have been a change of use in that 40-year period between hay store, and maybe that is when the archives are moved to the record tower. What I hadn't noticed before, and that Ryan Gregory very quickly picked up on, is that the ground plan of the castle by Treswell agrees with Clarkson's survey. It shows that the record tower, the southeast corner tower, as open-backed and only level in height with the top of the wall. There is no third story.
How long's the difference between those 2 plans that Treswell made?
Well, seemingly they're all part and parcel of the 5 plots, so they're done at the same time. And Ryan's impression from working with the 2 sources is that the bird's eye view has some other irregularities when compared with the ground plan, and that maybe there's a bit of artistic license being used here, and certainly he would go with the evidence of the ground plan rather than the bird's eye view. In that case, the record tower was rebuilt at the end of the 19th century because of structural weakness, and it appears that it's been rebuilt as it appears on Clarkson's bird's eye view. If we now discount that and say that it's not accurate, we've got a stone monument to it in the corner of the Bailey. So yes, there's definitely a question to be answered there.
And do you think that Ryan, being an outside source who wasn't as familiar with the castle as you were, do you think that helped solve some of these discrepancies?
Yeah, I think it did. He was able to spot things as he was modelling that may not have really been questioned before, like the record tower. Another example is the watchtower, the famous watchtower, which is seen on the top of the keep, off the roof of the keep, which is described very clearly in Clarkson. I'll just turn to the quote.
Chris has brought documents with us, not the original, sadly.
Not the original.
So yeah, this tall watchtower on top of the keep, if you've ever seen Canaletto's view of Alnwick Castle, which is one of our most famous paintings, there is a much, much taller tower above any of the others on the entire castle site, and this could be the same one.
Yes, Clarkson describes, there is raised on the west side of the said dungeon, by which he's meaning keep, it's donjon, one little square tower called the watchtower, above the leads 14 yards, wherein is place for a watchman to be and a beacon to be set or hung. So that's very clear, and the description tallies with what you see in Canaletto. I mean, that's slightly exaggerated. But you'll also see it in Hartover's painting, circa 1690. It's visible, probably more realistic. It's a sort of squattish tower on top. If you also compare it with Warkworth Castle has the same feature, and it was possibly part of a chain of watchtowers / beacons at high points, so that communication between the seats could be made.
And at that point, I always envisioned Lord of the Rings and beacons being lit and messages being passed along long distances. That would have been the purpose for beacons between castles in Northumberland?
Yes, I believe so. I think it would be a way of raising the alarm. If there's a raiding party coming, the message could be passed. Maybe via Ratchef, if there was some kind of... Now there's the observatory, obviously that's 18th century, but that's the next high point from here, and whether that's then visible from Warkworth. I've never been up the tower at Warkworth, so I don't know how far you can see from there.
Worth a test.
Yeah, I think we should test that out. You can also see that watchtower on photography, mid-19th century photography of the keep, before the castle is altered by the 4th Duke, who removes the watchtower, and the Prudder Tower now stands in place of that, so the whole tower is taller rather than the little watchtower on the top. So this was a bit of a mystery, because the watchtower is not shown on Treswell, either on the bird's eye view or on the plan of the leads of the keep. It's clearly not there. And this is quite bizarre because it's described in 1567 and then it's clearly seen in the 17th century painting by Hartover. So I thanked Ryan for pointing this out and I said that I would do a bit of digging into this because I was cataloguing, particularly during lockdown, I was cataloguing some of the accounts in Science C class in the archives, and I did come across something interesting in an account roll of Robert Delaval, who was receiver for Northumberland to Henry the Earl in 1610, and one of his list of repairs at Alnwick Castle mentions new making the lead house tower. Now, it's very tempting to think that lead house means up on the leads and this is the watchtower, and that for some reason it's been taken down and they've rebuilt it in 1610, a couple of years after Treswell's done his survey. So Treswell is accurately reporting there is no watchtower, and then they rebuild it in 1610. It's tempting to think that that's the answer. I don't think we can be certain, but it would fit quite nicely.
Yeah, and that uncertainty leads us to what I think my favourite little trick of the model is. Tell us about how you've resolved the watchtower problem on this model.
Well, we felt that as the watchtower was a feature of the castle, certainly from 1567 right the way through to the mid-19th century, and that maybe this was just a blip of perhaps a couple of years around the time of Treswell's survey, that we ought to have the option of showing it. And so Ryan suggested he would print it out, but that he would put a magnet in the bottom of it. And so it is a detachable watchtower.
Excellent. Every home should have one, a detachable watchtower. So visitors will see the model with the tower on, yes, but we have the option of removing it should any further evidence come to light. And speaking of that evidence, you're talking about digging into the archive, cataloguing documents, reading Clarkson's survey from 1567. Are these sources difficult to interpret? We're talking about it quite straightforwardly, but these are not documents written in typed modern English by any stretch.
No, that's quite true. Clarkson is a 16th century secretary hand. It is quite difficult. But again, for several years, I've relied on a published version of it. Davidson's account in 1822 gives a transcript of it. I hadn't had the excuse or the time to actually go back to the original source, which I did as part of this. And that's been very rewarding. There are certain words that were certainly misunderstood, I think, by Davison, or that just didn't make any sense. There still are one or two, but I think we've shed light on some things. For instance, there was mention of the chapel being in good repair, the Silong only accepted. And this puzzled us for some time. What is a Silong? Is this some kind of strange ecclesiastical thing? Well, after a bit of research, and particularly in the Oxford English Dictionary, the full version with the magnifying glass.
The only Oxford English Dictionary an archivist needs.
Yeah, the compact version. It is clear that actually Silong, Sylong, is a variant of ceiling, which now makes perfect sense.
Yes.
So there were various examples like that. And also I found parts of the survey which had been skipped, a line or two had been skipped here and there by Davison, easily done. One thing I would say is we have had it digitised, and I was able to look at it on the screen and type it on the screen next to it. So there are certain things that make it easier than it might have been by candlelight in the 19th century when Davison was working on it. So the record tower over there is full of archives, floor to ceiling, 3 stories worth, and I think there's a lot still to come out as cataloguing work proceeds. There's several times my lifetime's work in that tower alone, and it's ever growing because this is a growing collection. The estate is still working and creating new records for the future. But it's very rewarding actually to have the time to be able to catalogue fresh material and bring it to light.
Are you glad you got the excuse and the time to go back to these original sources?
Yes, yeah, because it's not all the time that I do get a chance to do that. Usually it is for projects like this, or in the case of lockdown, I mean that was external forces at play, which meant that we had more time to devote to things like that. We've just had 2 students from the Archives course at Liverpool who have been working on some more of the Scion X class, which is estates previously part of the estate but no longer by the mid-18th century. So they were working on the Cumbrian papers, and again, some interesting things have come to light.
This is not an archive that has stopped with no new discoveries. There's always something happening or being found.
Yes, definitely. And some of this material may be catalogued in the 19th century, and the interest in the 19th century is the legal side of things and the business side of things, whereas now we might take more account of the historical importance of some of these items.
You have to understand how archivists in the past thought.
Yes.
And that helps how you work as well.
Yes, definitely. The Scion catalogue it runs to thousands of pages. This is manuscript.
And that's just the catalogue? That's
just the catalogue. And it's perfectly possible to navigate using it. But if I were now approaching, say this account roll of Robert Delaval, I'm picking out details, and there's a full catalogue entry now for that item, which previously might have been one of 30 in a series with a date span, and that would be as much information as you got.
We'll get back to the model, though. How different is the model that visitors will see from the castle they'll see outside of that model? What are some of the biggest changes? Are there any areas that look the same as they would have done in 1608?
Yes, certainly they will recognise the footprint. The footprint of the castle remains pretty constant. The Barbican and Gatehouse pretty much unchanged, the Constable's Tower. What you will see is the fact that there's no way in or out of the castle other than the Barbican and the concealed postern gate in the postern tower.
So neither of the visitor entrances that people will go in and out of the castle of today are there on this model.
That's it. There was no way in or out across the moat at this date. The other thing you'll see is the curtain wall that joins up to the keep, where we now have the terrace and the views over the landscape. That was enclosed at this date. Obviously the chapel, a freestanding building in the Inner Bailey. In the 18th century that moves to the Middle Gateway Passage, and then in the 19th century moves again and becomes a new addition to the keep. In the Outer Bailey there are these large stables. Clarkson mentions stabling for 160 horses in the castle at that date in 1567. There's also various mentions in the accounts that I've picked out. Again, in the 1610 account, we have mentions of new making the Chequer House stairs and mending racks and bays in the stone stable, and also slates of the long stable. So I think we've got the names of the two stables there, which is which. They both look quite similar in length. And of course the Exchequer House, which I've mentioned, freestanding building. These buildings were cleared in the 18th century under the first Duke and Duchess's restoration.
And it's not just the buildings, some of the ground levels changed since the time of this model as well.
Yes, and the most puzzling area is the Inner Bailey. We know that in the 18th century the ground level was changed, and certainly the Postern Tower and the Constable's Tower, their basements were earthed up, and I think this is a deliberate levelling of the ground. In the 19th century, the fourth Duke undid that and he dug them back out again. So that's what you see today, with the quite steep slope down to the basement of those two towers.
In one of which is the model, in fact.
Yes. You'll be able to see this in the basement of the Constable's Tower, which is quite fitting because the Constable's Tower is one of the towers that has been least altered since the 14th century. The puzzle extends, though, along that wall towards the Record Tower, and visitors will no doubt notice the window openings in the curtain wall, and there's two up a height and one seemingly below ground level. There's a good 10 to 12 foot difference in height between the level of the inner bailey on the inside and the ground on the outside of the curtain wall. This came up in discussion with Ryan, and the record tower has a below ground level room that is below ground level on the inner bailey side and actually well above ground level on the outside. So I was able to share with him a plan of excavations that have been made in that area in the 1890s. This is possibly connected with the taking down of the record tower and the reconstruction of it, clearly showing foundations of a building that came off the wall at that place where the window openings are. And it is mentioned in Clarkson's survey that in 1567 there once was a fair accommodation block, but all evidence of it had been removed other than the foundations. So Clarkson's aware of it, but it's already long gone by the time he's surveying.
Just to finish off, what were your first thoughts when you saw the model finished and delivered to the castle and arriving more or less in your office? And what's your favourite thing about the model?
I was bowled over by it. I thought it is brilliant to see it. It's so detailed. The only thing that isn't visible on this model that we know would have been there is the little figures on the battlements.
People can visit the model now and see the result of all of this work. The archive holds thousands and thousands and thousands of stories, and hopefully you'll come back on the podcast and share some more of them sometime. But for now, Chris Hunwick, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
If you would like to see the castle model on your visit to Alnwick Castle this year, you'll be able to do so on the bottom level of the Constable's Tower. For more information, please visit our website, alnwickcastle.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please let us know by emailing us on podcast@alnwickcastle.com or by tweeting us @AlnwickCastle. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and leave a review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Alnwick Castle Podcast. But for now, I've been Daniel. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.